Democratic strategist James Carville called President Biden the most tragic figure in modern American politics, criticized the president for his decision to wait until so close to election day to remove himself from the presidential race. Carville blamed the historic dropout for Vice President Harris's loss. The difference in R would be if he would have, in September of 2023 or August, said he wasn't going to run. Goddamn, we would have won this election, he said on the latest episode of his podcast, Politics War Room. And it wouldn't have been that close because we would have had so many freaking talented people that were running, and he would be sitting here right now getting ready to leave on a high note. They would be naming commissions to figure out what are we going to name after him. He added that Biden knows he blanked up and would have been the toast of Washington had he made different choices. The strategist was seen as a predominant voice in calling for the incumbent president to step aside during the election, although he said helping lead that push transformed him into the person he's always hated. Carville also previously called out Harris's campaign for their spending practices and said the campaign lacked motivation. You know, when I saw the headline for this, for that article, I started thinking of just Biden's career in general, and he could be a top contender for, most tragic person in modern American history. And, again, in terms of political history, where you have this man who is elected one of the youngest senators ever, and in between being elected and inaugurated, you have the death of his first wife and child. And he spends the next, decade or so basically trying to hurry his way to the White House. And when he finally is able to run in 88, his, I would say, lack of maturity leads him to plagiarize, to copy, RFK and Hubert Humphrey, and eventually bow out early. And of course, he can't just, be out of the campaign, just go back to the Senate. No, he has this crippling disease that affects him for quite a while. Then over the next 20 years, he's in the Senate. He's taken more moderate or Republican-like positions because he transforms with the Democratic Party. He's an embodiment of the transformation from New Deal liberalism to, the more right-wing neoliberalism that we see in the modern day, where it's like Republican light. But he writes this crime bill. He's part of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and eventually that consistent, prominent role in the party leads him to try to run for president again and fail, but then have like a saving grace moment where he gets to be the vice president of the first black president in American history. And when that man's tenure is over and he's thinking, hey, maybe it's finally time for me to, take one final swing at running for president, one of his other children dies. And that leads into him just being like, yeah, I can't run and also be dealing with this, so forget it. And then his party loses that election, and then he comes back and is able to win as his cognitive abilities are clearly starting to go down or be affected severely. So yeah, he is someone who I think is very tragic in terms of his placement in history. It's not to say he's some victim or when people criticize him relating to policy, they're not they're wrong for doing that. I mean, I've done it repeatedly for years. But there is a certain tragedy to the idea of someone wanting an office for their entire life, and when they finally get it, their mind is slipping. They're not. If you watch Biden during the time he was Obama's VP, and even before that, if you watch his debate with Paul Ryan, if you watch his closing remarks when he was presented with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, you can see someone who is all there. And I really believe that if Biden had run in 2016 and been the party nominee instead of Hillary, Trump would have either lost or it would have been a lot harder for him to pull off the victory that he did. Because I think Biden is certainly Biden when he was all there was a better campaigner than Hillary, more likable, etc. So yeah, he's someone who I do think will, unfortunately, because I don't think that the 2000, this election cycle was the fault of a lot of people. It was the fault of a elderly president who clearly doesn't, is not all there. It was the fault of a Democratic Party that was fine with running this person who was clearly not all there. It was the fault of pundits who and news organizations that try to ignore the people that run against him, like Marianne Williamson, like Dean Phillips, like Robert Kennedy Jr., when he was still in that primary. And it's going to take a long time to properly diagnose all of the factors that gave us, as Andrew Yang said, Trump the sequel. But I don't think Biden as a singular figure can be blamed for this result. I think any Democrat running would have been saddled with inflation and all the other issues people have had with his tenure. And yeah, they would have had more time to make the case for themselves. I think someone who wasn't his vice president would have an easier time doing that than Harris did. But in all seriousness, it's something that there are just so many different factors, that go into where you wonder how much would, it have been different if Newsom or Whitmer or Shapiro were the nominee instead of Harris, where you just start to wonder, would it have made the difference? And I can't say definitively that it would have. So I like, I don't normally agree with Carville. I think he has said a lot of ridiculous things, but this is one time where I can kind of see his point. I do think if Biden had chosen to stick to the whole like transitional candidate thing and only have one term and not make any type of attempt at running again, right? Like never announce a reelection campaign, and given Democrats more time to pick somebody else, I think even if they lost, he would still be seen as someone who, because like they're trying to do this now, where he made such a choice to step aside and he'll go. It's like no, he was pushed out by his party after they saw that terrible debate performance between him and Trump. But if he had chosen at the start of last year to say, hey, look, I'm clearly not as all put together as I used to be. I can't do this anymore, but I want my party to be able to retain the White House even in my absence. So, I'm going to let them have their process and then endorse whoever comes out afterward. Obviously, I have my preference of my VP, but if they pick someone else, I'll support them anyway. If he had done that, I guarantee he would be more well received by members of his party. But for those of us who were here and will, be writing and talking about it for the next 10, 20, 30 years, we're going to remember that very, very old, decrepit, decaying Biden, or as Katie Britt would call him, diminished, took a long time to get out of the field, and it played a factor, or maybe it wasn't the factor, but it was a factor in leading Trump back into the White House. It's only sad because when you think of all of the things he has been through as a politician, for his final election to be him saying I'm running and then getting pushed out by his party, it is tragic, but it's something he brought on himself.